Hello, everyone. Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for coming out here tonight. My name is Erica, and I am the events coordinator for Books Are Magic. Before we get started, thank you. I wanted to go over some housekeeping points. First off, we are kindly asking you folks to keep your mask on at all times during this event, covering both your mouth and nose. We have masks to spare if needed at the check-in desk. Towards the end of the conversation, we will be doing an audience hand-raised Q&A, so start thinking of questions to ask now and raise your hand once the time comes. After the talk tonight, EM will be signing and personalizing books. Additionally, we have extra copies of Daughters of the New Year, and guess what, folks? The holidays are coming around, so grab those books. They are available for purchase from my wonderful colleagues JG or Zoe, whom you met at check-in. If you are joining us virtually on the YouTube live stream, we encourage you to buy a copy of Daughters of the New Year online using the link in the live stream description. Tonight, it is my privilege to introduce EM Tran and Megan Abbott, who are here to discuss EM's novel, Daughters of the New Year, highly praised by the New York Times Book Review, BuzzFeed, People Magazine, and Library Journal. In this multi-generational novel, we follow the women of a Vietnamese family. Unlike most novels, though, this story is told in a reverse timeline, lending itself to a beautifully eye-opening story of culture, beliefs, and all the things we do for our family. Daughters of the New Year is an exquisite debut full of sharp detail, poignant character experiences and dynamics, and many moving moments that make up the nuances of Asian stories and histories. Gift this one to the hard-headed sister or the stone-faced yet tender-hearted mother in your life, and she'll be sure to thank you for years to come. EM Tran is a Vietnamese-American author with an MFA in creative writing from the University of Mississippi and a PhD in English and creative writing from Ohio University. Her fiction has been published in Joyland, Little Fiction, Territory, Complete Sentence, and her nonfiction has been published in Harvard Review, Los Angeles Review Books, and others. Tran's work has received the Glenn Luce Award, the Prairie Schooner Nonfiction Award, and was listed as a notable essay in Best American Essays 2018. Megan Abbott is the Edgar-winning author of the novels The Turnout, Give Me Your Hand, You Will Know Me, The Fever, Dare Me, The End of Everything, Bury Me Deep, Queen Pin, The Song Is You, and Die a Little. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Guardian, Wall Street Journal, and elsewhere. So without any further delay, everyone please join me in giving a warm welcome to EM and Megan.
We're going to start with a reading, right?
Yes.
Yes, okay, good. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks for coming, everyone. I'm going to read from the beginning of my book tonight. I don't think that you need that much context, but essentially there's a mother and her 3 daughters, and you follow the family and it goes backwards in time. And each chapter alternates between one of the perspectives. So the first daughter that we see from the perspective from is Nee, and she is on a reality television show called Eligible Bachelor, which is essentially The Bachelor. I just ripped it off. This is in the first chapter, so I'm not spoiling anything, but she gets separated from the group. I don't know if anyone here watches, well, I know that some people watch The Bachelor, my editor for one, but I don't know how many people watch The Bachelor, but it's a very controlled environment, and they put all of these women in like one room together, and then they fight to the death over one mediocre man, and they're not allowed to like do anything except for care about this one guy. So she gets separated from the group in Vietnam where they're visiting, and then she comes back to the hotel. So that is where I will enter the story. When she got back to the hotel suite later, the other girls had already drunk 8 of the 12 bottles of wine provided by the producers. "They'll get us more if we ask," said the professional dog walker. "No point in rationing." The cameramen hovered behind the couch and near the curtained window. They never ceased filming in the sleeping quarters because that was where all the disagreements occurred, where the girls felt most cooped up, irritable, and lonely. The place where they had time to overthink about Ben, the mediocre man, about their families, about the jobs they had left to be here. It was an intense 2 or 3 month filming spree, and they didn't get paid. But the exposure was worth it, and if they got eliminated, they had the chance to be invited to one of the show's spin-offs. At least 2 assistant producers were always there, sitting in the corner of the suite with their headsets on, bored and ambivalent, directing the cameramen and pulling girls aside for individual interview footage. "Where have you been?" said the visual artist. Nee had learned the visual artist was actually a hairstylist, but the way she described it, it was more of a side gig. My main job is being an artist, she'd said. I specialize in abstract art and acrylic paints. This was hilarious to Nee at first, and it definitely still retained its comedic appeal. But the visual artist had smuggled in a traveling watercolor set, and she sketched and painted sometimes at the dining table. She was actually a good artist. They had the peculiar relationship, as all the women had with each other, of being amiable friends who sometimes chatted about their favorite hobbies one moment, and the next they turned into hostile competitors who had no problem launching the most personal attacks. I was sightseeing, said Nee. Eye rolls rippled around the room. They all thought she was trying to create her own storyline on the show, trying to stand out from the crowd. She didn't bother explaining that it really had been an accident, a spontaneous decision born of her desire to get away. I'm glad to see you made it back all right, said the taxidermist. There were snickers. You were gone for a long time. You know we're not allowed to leave, right? I was trying to get away from everyone here, said Nee. She had to stand up for herself, even if she didn't like to, even if the others misinterpreted her actions as snobbishness. Lashing out made everything worse, but she felt unsettled that day, more reactionary. The little girl was nowhere to be seen. It was a ghost. At the spot by the river, and when she had put her hand in her purse, crisp bills brushed against her skin once again. Whoa, said the taxidermist. Aren't we feeling cranky? We're all here for Ben, said the entrepreneur from Dallas. Nee felt the tension frizzle again. What would Ben think if he knew you were leaving? If you can't handle it, then I don't need to tell you. This is serious, and Ben is here to find his wife. There was a purr of agreement. Nee hated the entrepreneur from Dallas, a genuinely dull woman who had started a line of hair ties that supposedly didn't stretch out after multiple uses. The former ballerina had pointed out that they were simply scrunchies, which had been the source of a huge house conflict, resulting in the former ballerina's elimination from the show. I'm here for Ben too, said Nee. This wasn't at all true, nor was it true for most of the other women who were all really models, actors, musicians, or various other occupations in the entertainment industry. But there was an unspoken agreement that this charade was indispensable, that they had to keep up the ruse for their own benefit, or else all this had been a waste of time. A larger audience for their social media accounts, more opportunities for sponsorships, a greater chance at being cast for other shows. At least that was how it had started. They weren't allowed to use their cell phones or bring books. They weren't allowed to watch television or use the internet either. The producers plied them with alcohol and forced them into small quarters together. But Nee began to suspect that the charade was no longer a charade for most of them, that somehow the show had become reality. It was why Nee could barely stand to be in the room with everyone these past few weeks. Even so, she too felt the disconcerting nerves, the butterflies in her stomach when she saw or spoke to Ben, a man to whom she normally would never be attracted. It was like Stockholm Syndrome, a captive to the well-oiled machine of eligible bachelor. And she could feel it happening, but was powerless to stop it. She was afraid that it might become real for her too, out of pure circumstance and inevitability. She knew her mother would have something infuriating to say about it all, probably attributing her difficulties with the other women to unlucky star positions for tigers, or an inhospitable year for anyone born in the element of fire. She imagined her mother flipping through her astrology book, searching for Ben's birth chart, and clucking unhappily, conveniently interpreting their signs as incompatible. Nee was an aspiring actress and had lived in Los Angeles for the past 10 years, but for every contestant living in LA, the information bar on the screen instead said their hometown to make the cast appear more like a collection of America's sweethearts rather than another Los Angeles casting call. For every model, of which there were at least 16 in the original batch of 25 girls, an alternate occupation was used. The show producers wanted the cast to appear more diverse. They'd asked Nee if she cared if they used Vietnamese food critic as her occupation, because in the contestant questionnaire she'd said pho, along with pumpkin ravioli, seafood paella, and fried chicken, was one of her favorite meals, and because she'd written a few posts for a now failed food blog. Nee wasn't sure why, but she told them it was fine. even though it wasn't.
This is so exciting. Lizzie and I go way back to Oxford, Mississippi. I'm going to say 2013, where Lizzie was, I was a writer in residence, and Lizzie was one of my students. So this is very exciting and thrilling because I love this book so much. And I was so excited to see the rave review in the New York Times. Yes. Called it a daring debut. The novel's magical realism contrasts poignantly with its depiction of the two real pressures of assimilation which the modern Tran girls face. In spare prose, Tran paints the sacrifice, guilt, and culture clash of immigrant families. So that was so exciting to see, and this is really wonderful. I guess my first question is sort of the inevitable question with debut authors is there's a little bit of an assumption that first novels are at least in part autobiographical, and you are from New Orleans, as are the sisters in the book, and you do write in the foreword about an autobiographical connection, but can you talk a little bit about the part of it that comes from you and where it diverges and where the book came from for you in general?
Yeah, I can. I feel like I've prepared for this question because a lot of the structure of the family is the exact structure of my own family. So people are like, "Oh, your oldest sister, is she a lawyer and a lesbian?" And I'm like, "No, she's not." But I think that for me, a lot of it was small moments that have happened or emotions that I feel in interactions with my parents or with my sisters, and then twisting that into scenarios that I personally find interesting, right? Because like sometimes I think the worst thing is like when you write something fictional that's autobiographical and it's like something insane and someone's like, I don't believe this, and you're like, but it really happened, and it actually doesn't really matter if it happened or not. So for me, it's like it was like finding different topics that I was interested in, like reality shows or beauty pageants or the dragon dances, and then encapsulating the feelings that I'd had growing up, or that I feel that maybe the experiences that I'd had with my sisters and with my parents, and putting it within the context that I was interested in. But I would say that some of it is based in things that I had really felt. Like, for example, I'm not fluent in Vietnamese, and so it's always been like a very sensitive topic for me. Like, I'm very hyper defensive about it. And part of that comes from being not really a part of the Vietnamese community in our neighborhood, and going to like New Year's fairs and feeling like people are, probably in reality no one cares, but like I walk in and I think people are, notice me or think that like, oh, look at that person who doesn't know how to speak Vietnamese, which of course isn't happening. But of course, like I have never personally, done a dragon dance. I've never even touched a costume, but I put that into the book because it allowed me the opportunity to talk about those feelings that I'd had, if that makes sense.
It does. I mean, it's very visceral. In the book, one of the daughters feels like with other Vietnamese American children in her class at school that they can speak it so fluently, and she feels so on the spot, and that felt so. It felt like such a fraught moment, and it has that kind of integrity of the real, which is sort of the thing you want even if you're faking it, right? But there's some element that comes from your experience.
Yeah, I mean, I read so many books about immigrant narratives where, of course, and these narratives are completely valid, right? Where you have a family that is not from the U.S. that has come there and they are, not included in mainstream white America, and so they find refuge or some kind of home in an immigrant community, and they're accepted into that. But I thought, what happens when the character is not included in that community? So I was interested in exploring that because, it is like, I felt like there wasn't a place for my experience, and so I created it essentially in the book.
And that is sort of the trap of the especially with a debut novelist. Like, were you on The Bachelor, Leslie? Lizzie, were you on The Bachelor? Were you a contestant? No one's asking you that, I guess. But it's so funny how, I mean, there's parts that are going to be very heightened and are about what you're interested in and things you want to explore. But there are also parts that, especially maybe the emotional touchstones, that are very, very true.
Yeah. I mean, I think more than basing it on my family, I was more interested in, like, the archetype of the oldest child, the middle child, the youngest child, and like what happens for that child when they're born, when they're the firstborn. Like, there's so much pressure, right? Especially in an immigrant family. What about the middle child? I mean, like, there's so many. I mean, Jan Brady, right, is a middle child, and we know that Jan Brady is a middle child because there's like so many expectations we have about what it means to be a middle child. So I was more interested in that necessarily than basing it specifically one-to-one on like the people in my life.
Right. No, that makes sense. And I mean, and this comes up even in the excerpt you read, but the zodiac is an ongoing motif in the book, and I found it fascinating. And I wondered if it was always a part of it for you, and did you research a lot? Because it was, I mean, there's a sort of origin story, of course, of the Vietnamese zodiac, but I found all of it sort of riveting, and it does become, it's laid through so delicately, but then it becomes quite important. It's sort of almost a sort of the mom that's obsessed with the zodiac, almost a joke at the beginning, but it has sort of increasing resonance as the story goes on. Can you talk a little bit about how that came into the book?
Yeah, you know, my mom actually does love the zodiac, and a secret is that she emails us every year and says, like, leave the house at this direction, don't wear the, like, she'll give us like a whole list, like a laundry list of things that we're not allowed to do or that we should do. And one of the things that she always tells us is you have to leave the house in, you know, X, Y, or Z direction. And I actually never know what that means because I'm like, what if the door's not in that direction? But I can't admit to her that I've never done it. So I just pretend that I do. But I also can't ask her because then she'll know that I never did it. But yeah, no, I'm inspired by like that relationship, right? Like that she emails me every year and she's like, leave the house in the southwest corner. And I'm like, do I go out of the window, you know? And it like, for me, like that chasm between her generation, which is like, this is really important to her. She really doesn't want me to wear white all year because a horrible calamity will befall me if I do it. And like me, who barely understands what it is that she needs me to do. So I was really, really interested in putting that in the book, like having that tension there, like the mom really, really cares about it. And also besides that, like it was a really great way for me to build the characters because I don't know if any of you have ever tried to write a character from scratch, but it's hard. So having like a zodiac tell you what a person should be like is great. But regardless of whether or not the characters were like or not like their zodiac signs, to me it was more just like that they were always compared against it. And so I was, fascinated with that dynamic as I was going through, like whether or not the zodiac is quote unquote real, it doesn't really matter because it becomes real for the characters because they're constantly thinking about it. They're constantly like, oh man, like I'm not living up to this idea of what I'm supposed to be. And then as you go farther back, I think I was also interested in like the idea that the zodiac has such longevity, like it continues to this day, like people still talk about it, and that requires this kind of folkloric oral tradition of this passing on of information and cultural traditions. And when I think about, like, part of the project of the book was going backwards and thinking about, like, how do I uncover what I don't know? The zodiac was always there. Right? So it's kind of intertwined with that.
Yeah, so it becomes a structure for you.
Yeah.
And it's, because it's a lunar too, so it really, I mean, it has this sort of power.
Yeah.
And it seems like for the mother, it is a way, it's a way of expressing worry and concern for her daughter's safety in the world and all the sort of connotations of that. It's a way of saying she loves them in some ways. So did it become that way too for the emotional balances of the relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also for the mom character, Swan, there's so much in her life that is out of her control. And so the zodiac, I feel, I mean, and this is why people read their daily horoscope, right? It gives you some semblance of control over your life. You're like, what's going to happen today? Okay, I don't know if anyone here is subscribed to the CoStar app. But the CoStar app has do's and don'ts for the day, and sometimes the do's and don'ts are like nonsensical. It's like, do poetry, don't hate your mom. Like it's like a bunch of, it's like really random, but I feel like I still check it every day. I laugh at it. I'm like, okay, well maybe I will read poetry today. You know, but like it gives you some semblance of control, and so for that character, yes, it's showing care, but I think more selfishly for her, like, she's lost so much. She's lost her home. She's lost people in her family. And so the zodiac is one way for her to feel like she has the illusion that she can control what's going to happen, you know?
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. And I mean, it's symbols, and there's of course another big symbol in the book, which is this trophy that you write about even in the foreword. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. And it's a pageant trophy, and there are so many different kinds of pageants, metaphoric or literal, in the book, and that becomes such a fascinating organizing principle for it. And it's sort of from the exalted to the mundane to the horrific, and was that always in there? And I understand from the author's note at the beginning that has an autobiographical connotation as well.
So I wrote an essay about it when I was in grad school. I was in a nonfiction workshop, and I wrote an essay about this giant silver trophy that my mom has. It's in our piano room. It's on the piano, and I didn't actually realize how strange it was that this trophy was in our house, because it's always been there, until I started really thinking about it and thinking, like, why do we have this giant trophy? Like, my mom came over on a boat, like it was very dramatic. They were, trapped on the sea. I can't imagine her dragging this trophy, of all things to bring with you to America, like the trophy. And then I started trying to ask her questions about it. She was very evasive. And I tried to do research on the pageant. I couldn't find anything. And I started to realize, like, I had basically created a narrative about the trophy. Like, I had essentially erased it from my family history in order to just make it exist without question, right? And so when I started investigating that, I felt very ashamed. Like, I was like, oh my God, like, there's such an interesting history behind this trophy, and I didn't even bother to look into it. And so that's the real story, is that my mom has a trophy. In the book, the character
Miss Saigon.
It's a Miss Saigon trophy. Yes, and also the idea that there's like a pageant happening in the middle of the Civil War,
1975 or something.
Yeah. Like they're just like prancing around on stage having a pageant. Like things are not crumbling around them, which to me I think is hilarious. But I mean, also if you think about, you could say that things are crumbling actively right now, and we're just in a bookstore having a conversation. But yeah, I felt like so the character Swan is also in a pageant, and I included that because I was interested in various forms of spectacle. So like there's the reality show, there's the pageant. There's another like reality show in there that you kind of glimpse briefly, and there's also different kinds of performances that the characters have to enact in order to survive, and I was really interested in that. And so the pageant is just one part of that, and also like the book focuses on women, so I was particularly interested in how women have to perform a certain kind of femininity in order to get by and survive in the world. So the pageant trophy that my mom has really inspired that, because I think about my mom's, my mother is very feminine. Like she was in a pageant. She was from a very wealthy family, and she still puts on like a full face of makeup every day She won't leave the house without wearing full face makeup. She's like, you know, she's a very, very classy lady. So I was thinking about how exhausting that must be in the face of like, you know, a lost country, being a refugee in the United States, not having an actual literal home for a certain amount of time. And how I just imagine her, I know actually for a fact that she probably got up every day, went to her, you know, her job that she didn't want in Washington, D.C., where she was a refugee, had a full face of makeup on, probably the few pieces of jewels that she had, and just like continued to perform as a woman. So I was really interested in kind of poking at that and thinking about how annoying that is.
And a kind of protection too,
Yeah.
in a way, right? I mean, it's sort of the masquerade that satisfies everybody, so
Right.
you can do what you need to do or want to do,
Yeah.
because it's sort of everyone's happy with this.
Right. And as you get farther back in time, I think maybe this was like a reflection of my writing process, and that like I got tired of writing the performance, and so I started writing parts of the story where the characters crack, and they're like, I don't want to do this anymore. And that was also because it was purely, I could use my imagination because it was so far back in time that I could, I'm sure I could do that in the present too, but I felt more free in the past. I could make the characters behave in ways that I couldn't imagine in the present.
Right. Well, that was going to be the next question, because the structure is so fascinating and I think so successful, because you really are very much in the present within relatively 10 or 15 years when we start. We're in 2016. We maybe go back to 2005, but we go back to 1975, and then we go way. Ultimately, we go back to like 3-digit days of we really go. You really move so expertly further and further back in that last 100 pages, where it sort of dilates, and sort of was that must have felt. Did it feel scary, exciting? I mean, it feels so connected and so organic to the story. But did it feel like a leap to take as a writer?
Yeah, I was, actually initially writing it backwards felt very uncomfortable, because I think that we're taught to view narrative as always moving forward. Like, we have an inciting incident and it creates a consequence, and it creates another incident, creates another consequence, and that is what moves narrative forward. We're always thinking about it as forward. And so when I was writing it backwards, I felt kind of uncomfortable and also a little bit insecure about it, because I felt like maybe it was just a bunch of short stories that I would written backwards in time or something. And it wasn't until I went to a writer's workshop, and one of my friends, I was telling her about the novel. This was in the very, very early stages. And she was like, that sounds like a novel. And I was like, you're right. It does. Thank you. And after that point, I was like, okay, this is a novel. You need to approach it like that. And so moving it backwards, I just had to become comfortable with the story looking slightly different than what a traditional narrative would look like. But as I got very, very far back, I felt like actually that was the most fun part of writing the book, because I got to do a bunch of research, which I love research. I'm one of the few people who has donated $1 to Wikipedia, and now they won't stop asking me for money. But I love reading about stuff. Like, you just discover so many cool things, and much of the stuff that I randomly discovered made it into the book. Like, what did I include in the book that was weird? Oh, like the Cercle Sportif.
That I love that stuff.
Yeah, it's real.
Yeah.
There's a recreational center in Vietnam that was it was started during Indochina. The French opened this recreational center, and it was for the social elite, the colonials, and for the social elite of Vietnam. And they had a pool at this recreational center.
It's like a country club.
Yeah, it was like a country club, and they would have like an annual ball every year at this country club. And I was just loving. There's like pictures from it. There's all kinds of information about it. I loved it, so I had to include it in the book. And then and also I feel like for Vietnam, the conflict that they've gone through, a lot of it is documented on TV, on video, and so I did a lot of research with that, and that felt it felt very strange that it was all on YouTube. I could just like look up these horrendous things on YouTube. But it was also like, it felt like I was doing archival work just like from my office in my home. So I really loved doing the second part of the book.
Well, it's that French part is so transfixing, and it sort of weirdly reminded me of like the other version of the Apocalypse Now, the sort of cut scenes of like the French who just never left Vietnam even during the war, and they're still essentially living in that country club life, but it's sort of it has this sort of heady, dark glamour, that you're so good at sort of taking on the sort of different glamours of these different worlds, even the reality TV glamour, the pageant glamour, that turns on a dime into such darkness. And it made me wonder about what parts of it maybe were hard to write. And you do deal with Katrina, of course, and like, what were the parts that maybe felt more challenging to go into?
I don't know if, I think maybe the whole thing was hard. just sitting down and like physically writing it was hard because I am very undisciplined. I'm a short burst.
You wrote the whole book.
I did. Yeah, and now I have to write another one, I think. I don't know. But yeah, no, I think that just the actual, maybe not the content of the actual writing of the characters, because I felt a little bit, it feels like I'm watching it, from afar a little bit when I'm writing it, so it doesn't feel so emotional. But I think the hard part was actually the work of just sitting and writing. And I think that, the very practical matter of finding the time to sit your butt down in the chair and do it was really hard. And then also the cutting was hard. There was one chapter in particular that I was very attached to that every single person who read it was like, you don't need this. Get rid of this chapter. And I was like, but the animals in it are cute. And no one wanted it. But it actually worked out for the best because I cut that chapter and then I wrote a new chapter, and that chapter kind of like found its way into the new one. So
yeah, it's usually that way, and then you tell yourself you're going to use it for something else anyway, and then you never do. But this also comes up a bit in the excerpt, but like there is a sort of the sort of annoying term is magical realism, just because it's annoying because it's sort of, I don't know, it feels sort of cheaply used term, but there are ghost figures, and even the elements, there is an element that's sort of very Baroque, that sort of heightened reality, and all of that feels so true to the telling of the story. But did that feel like a leap at all to sort of move out of sort of the sort of basic concrete realism into these other forms potentially?
Yeah, I actually didn't even realize that I was writing realism until someone was like, you're a very good realist writer. And I was like, thank you. I thought that the ghosts made it magical though. But I guess I write like a lot of realism in my work, and to me it was more, I don't know, sometimes I feel like I'm flailing wildly and I'm just like writing it, and it just happens,
So it was more of a surprise that people thought you were writing realism than magical stuff. I mean, normally one would feel like the leap to have a ghost,
right?
But for you, it felt the opposite.
In my mind, I was like, this is clearly all magic, and people were like, this is solidly realism. So I don't know. I also feel like I'm a very stubborn person when it comes to including the magical stuff, like the ghosts and the weird things, and I also am a big fan of like jumping between perspectives, sometimes within like a paragraph, and I feel when people are like, you shouldn't do that, I feel very, I get kind of mad about it. I'm like, why not? Why can't I do that? So I guess I focus more on the ghost stuff because that's like what I'm interested in, and maybe when people are like, you're a realist writer, I should be like, no.
Well, maybe it means, you are very in touch with popular culture. To have reality show, and there are a lot of really kind of like down and dirty details of being a contemporary woman, and I think that's what makes it so thrilling. When I mean, one of the beauty pageant scenes, like at a certain point you think, is this really happening? Because it's gotten so big and extreme, and it's so great, because to me it seems it's more, it struck me that maybe it was more about how it feels than how it is.
Yeah, I definitely, I mean, I don't know. Like, people always ask you about writing like, what is it like to write? Like, what is your writing process? And I'm like, is the wrong answer, I don't know. How I write stuff, like, it just happens,
That's
you know?
the best answer.
Unfortunately, I don't have as much self-awareness, I think, as other people.
Well, I mean, that seems right? Because I mean, I guess it wouldn't be true if you thought about it too much. I mean, well, I want to ask one more question and then I want to open it up, but I have to ask, of course, what's next? Because I read an interview with you where you tipped your hand with Susan Larson, and you might know why this would particularly intrigue me, but can you talk about what you might be working on next?
Yes, so my next book is about sorority women, and I've made up a town in northern Louisiana. It's actually also based on a real town called Poverty Point. It's a real place. It's called Poverty Point. It's named after the plantation house that it was Poverty Plantation. Amazing, I know.
It's gonna get stranger.
Yes, there's Indian mounds there. There's so many things. So I'm researching this place and I'm creating like a fake university town where they have a very intense sorority rush process. And you follow a Vietnamese American character from New Orleans, go through this process, and you kind of like, you know, are with her the whole time, like, oh, what's this thing that's happening? And Megan is interested in this because I wrote an initial draft of this when I was her student at University of Mississippi. It was a very different book. It was like a murder thriller type book, which I learned I was very bad at writing. So it is no longer a murder thriller book. There's no murder in this.
Not yet.
Not yet. We'll see what happens. But I actually was inspired in part by your book, The Fever, because there is a very a sickness that spreads throughout during this rush process. So there's a lot of things happening in that. I haven't, I'm working on it. It's like basically a whole new rewrite of the original draft that you read. But it feels exciting because it's like, it feels like I have like a new thing to look forward to. So
well, and the reason I asked is not just because I know you had written about that before, but because you were so good in this book, even with the sort of complexities of women together and girls together, and what we would call microaggressions. Then we just call being mean to each other. But the delicacies of that and how lacerating it can be. And it feels like, to me, it felt like you were really enjoying it. So I can see that it could be springing into something about female relationships. Oops.
Yeah. That too I learned from you as well, that like the things that hurt us are not the big things. It's like the small thing that someone says that they don't even realize it's something hurtful. Or maybe they do realize, and that's worse.
Yeah. It also comes up in the reality show component too, like women being pitted against each other, and all of that is it's woven in so delicately. I love the book so much. I want to see if we have questions from the audience for Lizzie about it. Who will start us off?
So the chapter with where the beauty pageant is really happens is beautiful. It's really wonderful part. And I just wanted to know about, I guess, the process of transferring these imagined histories, many imagined histories from Trophy, and how you ended up settling on that one.
Should I repeat the question?
Oh yes, thank you. That was my job. So the beauty pageant scene in the book, and now I was following the trail of it. But can you talk a little bit about how how you took that and wait, what was the question again? Sorry, Liam.
I started from a place with the trophy in real life that had been
Yes.
inspiration for this, and how the many imagined histories that you had for this trophy turned into that.
That's
single
right.
chapter.
So much better put. But the real trophy and how you imagine these different histories for it, and then how that sort of wove its way in the book.
Good question. Yeah, I didn't want there to be like a real so in the book there's not a real trophy, it's a fake trophy from the trophy store. And I think that when I starting there, I kind of just let that change in the story govern how I was going to write about it, basically. So like, because it's a fake trophy, it's an actual trophy, it's a plastic trophy from like a trophy shop. Once I replaced that component in the story, or created that component, there were certain things that I had to do. It was kind of like I had created a problem for myself that I had to solve. So it's like, okay, well, where does she buy the trophy? We have to do that. Like, what is it, there must be a real trophy, like what happens to the real trophy? That's a mystery then that the reader will want to know by the time they get to that part of the book. So I didn't really have a plan. I just like decided that the trophy was going to be this plastic, like, trophy from a trophy store. And then once I created that problem for myself, I had to like maneuver around it in ways that I just did on the fly, I guess. But yeah, is that a good answer?
Well, it makes me think back to the original essay, the Miss Saigon essay you wrote, because one of the things that, and this does come up a bit in the fictional version, but like that you had never really thought of, you had not even known. I mean, it was just always there. So you had never asked the question, and like, what's the moment like when you finally ask the question? Like, what is the story of this trophy? Like, and how is it sort of just this sort of thing that's there until it becomes something more?
Yeah, part of the book was like uncovering or like recreating gaps in my own history, like just imagining what it would be like if, I'll never know, right? Like I'll never be able to know. Maybe my mom will tell me, but it will always be some version of the story that will have gaps or holes, or maybe she won't tell me because it's too, hurtful for her to recount her past. And so for me, it's like when I'm placing myself within the character who was there, what can I create? What can I fill in to make it, one version of the truth, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Okay, yes, another question. I'm going to be better at repeating it this time. So, other questions. Yes?
Hi. Firstly, I just want to say I'm only candidly halfway through the book, but the chills I've gotten reading it because of how parallel it is to my life. My family is also first generation Vietnamese family, but just from the US, moved to Australia. Even the sister is the same age apart, the same dynamics. So I just want to ask, how did you find it difficult writing about the dynamics between your parents? Like, there are moments in the book where some of their responses or attitudes towards certain things can be very jarring, but I understand that there's a lot of tenderness behind that. So I'm just curious to see, like, how did you find it difficult to find that balance, to be able to say write what they actually say, but then balance it off with like what the actual intent and meaning behind all of that was. Can you answer that?
Yeah, so the question is sort of about the relationship between the parents, and was it hard to write about the sort of complexity that, I guess in some ways too, it's sort of a combative relationship between the parents, but there is this tenderness underlying it and all these sort of layers to it, and how to convey that.
Yeah, thank you for reading the book. Yeah, it was very difficult actually because, from my perspective, I get very, as we all, get annoyed with our parents, right? And so part of, in my opinion, being a good writer is being able to empathize with every single character that you're writing. So when I was writing the parental figures, I really had to empathize with them and place myself in their position, like, why are they so controlling? Why do they, the way that they show love is often harmful and sometimes hurtful, the way that it is expressed. But from their perspective, it's still in their minds a form of love. So I really, to me, like, that was balanced by having the different chapters be the perspectives, so that, you don't just have the children saying like, oh, she's so annoying, right? You have the mom being like pacing around the house, really super worried about where her kids are because she suffers from PTSD from, like, leaving a war-torn country. So there's these different, I think having the perspectives was very, very important, and then also juxtaposing them in particular ways. So when you have, a chapter where the mother-daughter relationship is very terse, or very tense, then we have the next chapter with maybe the mom by herself, just thinking about, what it is to have to raise children in a brand new country. So I was very mindful about like how I was juxtaposing the events, and I really didn't want to flatten the mom character or the dad either, because I felt like, then that's not very good writing. I didn't really do my due diligence to humanize every single person.
When I love that when you get to see how they met, and when you go
Yeah.
back in time, and it really changes the way you view everything, because you
Right.
don't really have them feeling close, their relationship with one another, that's in there when you see with the sort of first flush of meeting each other was so great. Was that always a plan, that you would sort of see them come together?
Yeah, because the relationship between the mom and the dad is also very unhappy in the beginning, and so I wanted to. Unhappy people aren't unhappy all the time, right? Like, they're not together. There has to be a reason that they're together. So I wanted to show, like, and also, not all narratives about immigrant families are unhappy, right? There are these moments of joy, and they're people too. They like to go out and eat dinner and have drinks, right? So I made sure to have those moments in there, because I didn't want it to all be doom and gloom. I wanted it to be funny. I wanted it to be, these moments of tenderness and love. So yeah, I'm glad you liked that chapter.
I loved it. Great. Another question? Yes.
Has your mom read the book? And what did she say?
It's a good question. Has your mother read the book, and what does she say?
Oh wow. Wait, that's.
I go straight for like,
Yeah.
how's your mom?
You went for the jugular. That's a hilarious question, because someone asked me that before the book came out, and I was like, no, my mom's not going to read the book. She doesn't read anything that I give her, which is fine. Like, it doesn't hurt me. That's okay. She's just not a reader, right? I was like, no, my mom probably is not going to read the book. Come the event day that the book came out, my mom was like super pumped about the book. She had learned that it was quote unquote about her. And she was like thrilled about it. She was like,
Did she learn from the New York Times?
I think she had like friends calling her, and they're like, Lon, I heard that your daughter wrote this book and it's about you. And my mom was like, it's about me? So like at the event, she was like, people were, because I was like, Mom, it's fiction. Like, don't take anything too much to heart. And she was like, apparently at the pub day book event, like, well, people write about the most interesting parts of their life, which means that I am the most interesting part of her life. And I was like, great. But she is reading it. She's like, she's like reading it very quickly, actually. She has like, I've gone over there and she's very far into it, and she's like, your imagination, it's so hilarious. I'm pretty sure she's taken like every moment where the parent is flawed and is like, that's made up. And every part where it's like the mom is a really great mom, she's like, yeah, this is true. True to life.
You'll be getting some notes soon.
Yeah, I will. I think. Actually, I've already gotten some.
Any other questions? No? Well, thank you all for coming out.
Thank
and
you,
thank you to
everyone.
everybody who doesn't have the book already and are tearing through it, needs to buy it. It's such an incredible book, and a really, really daring debut, as
Oh
the
my
Times
God.
says. So congratulations.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to EM and Megan for the very funny conversation. As a reminder, EM will be signing books at our signing table at our back desk. Please give her a moment to settle in back there, but we do ask that folks begin forming a line down the steps so our booksellers can begin breaking down the space. We do have additional copies of EM's book, Daughters of the New Year, as well as copies of Megan's books available for purchase at our check-in desk. For those still with us on YouTube, you can find the link to purchase books in the description. That is all from me, folks. Thank you again so much for coming out here tonight.
Do I go back there immediately?
Yeah.